Good morning, Chairman. We're now live.
Good morning. I would like to welcome everyone present in the chamber and those listening online to the business of the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Mike Brooks and I am the chairman of this committee. Councillor Alex Hall, vice chairman of this committee, is also in attendance. Can I remind you that the audio-visual feed of this formal public meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council's website, and all your comments will remain accessible online as the meeting recording remains on the Council's website. There is no fire drill planned this morning, and in the event of the fire alarm sounding, we need to leave the Council chamber through the rear doors and leave the building through the reception and assemble in the front car park and await further instructions. Can I request everyone present to ensure your mobiles, laptops and iPads are on silent for the duration of this meeting, and may I remind you that the hearing loop is now activated. Requests to speak will be collated by the Vice Chairman, and we will try to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to ask questions and make contributions. However, I will close down the debate to ensure we keep time. Therefore, I would appreciate contributions to be succinct and concise, and also ask that you indicate early when you wish to speak. We will now move into the formal agenda. Item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence and replacement members. Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Strengle and Councillor Mrs. Rawlins.
Thank you. On to item 2 then, declaration of members' interest. Have we any declarations of pecuniary interest other than those that are already declared on the DPI forms from any member? No, none declared. So going forward then, on to item 3. The minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of March 2024. And this item is to approve and sign the minutes of the last meeting as a correct record. And please turn to pages 5 to 12 of the agenda pack. And I will just go through that page by page for if anyone's got any thing to say as to the accuracy of the minutes. So page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, and page 12. Right, no one has got anything to say as to the accuracy. So this item is to approve and sign the minutes of the last meeting as correct record. We've been through them, no alterations to that. So do I have a proposer? Councillor Stokes, and seconded Councillor Ashton. Thank you. We will now vote. This is, those in favour, please indicate. Anyone against? No. Any abstentions? One abstention, and that is because Councillor Gibson wasn't present at the last meeting, I presume. Thank you. So those are carried. On to item 4 on the agenda then, announcements by the Chairman, Executive Councillors and Lead Officers. I have no announcements this morning, and we have a busy agenda as always with 2 pre-decision items to consider. Therefore, I should like to ask officers presenting reports to take these as read by members and only summarise key points and the type of input expected by the committee. Introduction of reports will be capped at 5 minutes to ensure we have sufficient time to consider and debate. I should also welcome Councillor Richard Cleaver, who is in attendance today in relation to item 7 of the Stamford Transport Strategy. So welcome, Councillor Cleaver. Moving on to Executive Councillor announcements. Do we have any announcements by the Executive Councillor? Councillor Davies? Oh, is he here today? Richard.
Good morning, Mike. Morning, committee.
Stuck in there, I didn't realise.
Just sneaking around to keep you all on your toes. No, nothing major for me this morning, thank you.
Thank you. Right, I'll move on then to announcements by senior officers. Any announcements by senior officers? Richard Fenwick?
Yeah, thank you,
Richard.
Chairman. I'm delegating for Karen Cassar this morning. No announcements from us, thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll then move on to the next item. So the next item is the bus. Item 5 is the bus service improvement plan. This pre-decision scrutiny report can be found on pages 13 to 70 of the agenda pack. The report outlines the County Council's response to the National Bus Strategy, Bus Back Better, initiated in October 2021. It details the submission of a bus service improvement plan, BSIP, to the Department for Transport, DFT, outlining plans to enhance the bus service network in Lincolnshire. Regular discussions with the DFT have maintained the BSIP as a pivotal tool for future funding opportunities. An update to the BSIP in 2023 reflected current circumstances and aspirations for the region. In late 2023, confirmation from the DFT of BSIP Plus and Network North funding was received, enabling the implementation of bus service enhancements outlined in the BSIP and enhanced plan and scheme. Additionally, the DFT issued revised guidance in January 2024 requesting councils to refresh their BSIPs with detailed spending plans with a submission deadline of the 12th of June 2024. A decision is due to be taken by the Executive Councillor for Highways, Transport and IT between the 7th and the 31st of May 2024. And it's asked that we consider the report and determine whether we support recommendations to the Executive Councillor and that we agree any additional comments to be passed on to the Executive Councillor in relation to this item. The report will be presented by Mike Reid, Head of Transport, and Helen Reek, Support Service Manager. So over to Mike.
Thank you, Chairman. Just wanted to introduce myself briefly to start with. I'm the new Head of Transport, been in place for several months. So a lot of what you just stated is essentially what I was going to say, just in teeing up Helen with a bit of an introduction. But this BSIP document essentially puts us in the shop window for any future funding. So if we don't submit this and refresh it, then we may not receive funding for any kind of BSIP type projects. So in the past we've spent well in this area. We're currently working on a programme of spending around 8.8 million, which we received in the last 18 months. And it's all good news for us because essentially it's free money, but we have to come up with a quite detailed plan which needs a lot of work with our bus operator partners and also highways partners, because a lot of the work is around highway infrastructure in terms of bus stop improvements. So I won't say any more, but I'll pass on to Helen and we'll take any questions at the end. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, just to remind ourselves that the bus service improvement plan, originally when it was drafted back in 2021, was a bidding document for BSIP money, and it's changed somewhat in its role now. So it becomes a local vision of how we will deliver the national bus strategy set back in 2021. And Mike's right, it will stop us from future funding, but also if we don't submit by the 12th of June, we won't get any current funding either. So that's sort of like the stick from the Department for Transport. Just in terms of, just to remind ourselves, the primary purpose for the DFT for all of this work is to increase passenger numbers. So what we've done in the covering report, we've set out some of the recent interventions we've done in the bus services, and you know, as you know from transport focus surveys and our own services, bus services regularly cite bus frequency and reliability in the top 5 things for passengers, and our enhancements provide some or all of the following. The strategy remains the same as what we previously reported around enhancing the number of town services and interconnect services. and also utilising the £2 adult fare cap on Call Connect services. We've successfully negotiated with the DFT to allow us to spend some of the funding on real-time information and bus infrastructure as well, so that gives us a whole package of interventions with a view to improving the network for passengers. Delivery for real-time will take place over the next 12 months. Initial deployments will be at Lincoln and Boston hospitals, while and then working with the districts to look at real-time in the bus stations across the county, and also be supplemented with real-time flag displays on key locations around the county. If you've got any suggestions, please let us know. We've got a good list of key interchange points across the county. Infrastructure work has also been scheduled with highways to make more marked stops and repair some of the bus shelters that we are responsible for. In most cases, it's left to the parish or the district to take that responsibility. Just in terms of the BSIP document itself, we were quite fortunate in updating our BSIP in 2023, so we've had a lot less work to do than those local transport authorities that last produced one in 2021. So we got some really good feedback when we submitted the 2023 BSIP from the Department for Transport, and then they said it really does tell the story of Lincolnshire well, and our ambitions and aspirations going forward, what we would do if we did get some further funding. Okay, just to say the new changes, I've summarised in a table in the covering report what changes are in this BSIP guidance, and the key for the Department for Transport is setting out a bit more accountability on what our current spend's doing, and also some aspiration about what we'd like to do in 25 to 30, and that's primarily at this stage for the DFT to get themselves in line for national funding awards, so they will put everybody's LTAs together in terms of that future aspiration. It's highly likely we'll have to do another update in 2025 when we get some more clarity on where things are going in terms of funding. So we think we comply with the requirements from the DFT for the BSIP, and I think it continues to tell a really good story of Lincolnshire and where we're going and for the future, and I think it's good and it's easy to read, and we've had that feedback from the DFT. So, like I say, happy to answer any questions that councillors may wish to ask.
Thank you for that, Mike and Helen. Good report, and good to see that we are moving forward with these improvements within Lincolnshire and getting the money to help us do that. I've got Councillor Clark has indicated to speak, so over to you, Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Completely welcome the report. As you know, for many years we've sat around here, me and my colleagues from Lincoln, asking for an evening service. When it says the evening service will start on April the 22nd, is there a stop date to that, or is this an ongoing, issue we can look forward to?
The existing funding is up till 2026. And the theory is that the more sustainable we can make these services by this intervention now, then hopefully they will have that commercial element. It's unknown after that what future government funding will be. If you wanted more detail on the last buses and the service, the Links bus info has got some good information with that. We can circulate that link after the meeting. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Vernon.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you. I found the report really interesting as well. I've got a number of points to raise, if I could perhaps go through them all and then sort of go from there. Thank you. I'm delighted to see the changes, particularly on the intertown bus services between Stamford and Grantham, increasing sort of their frequency, which is really good. Just on page 27, I know you mentioned just now that it's primarily the responsibilities of parish and districts, but I seem to recall from a previous meeting there were grants available to parishes for improvements to bus stops. And I think sort of the bus stop infrastructure and that will make buses much more supported locally, particularly in rural areas where perhaps they are somewhat lacking in some instances, I think it's fair to say. On page 30, you talk about the public engagement surveys, and I just wondered how that was carried out. Was it done through the Let's Talk and whatnot, or sort of other methods as well? Page 39, relating to child prices, I totally agree with your comments that they are utterly confusing. There's no blanket approach throughout the report, and I wondered what more we can do. It doesn't seem sensible to me that on one operator a child is classed as under 12, on another it's classed as under 15, and that just seems a really obscure situation that will be confusing to anybody who wants to use a bus. The better up-to-date information at bus stops, which 91% of people have mentioned they'd like in the report, page 43. The live journey tracker, is there any possibility of exploring an option such as train companies use, where you can almost log on to an app and gain absolute 100% accurate information? It does work, well, quite well with railway companies, and I think sort of fundamentally, again, we talk about reliability being the key to increasing people using the bus service. If they can sort of access that information more accurately and in real time, I think that would make a significant difference as well. The page 56, the consistent look and feel at bus stops, does need to be mindful of locations, and I know we've mentioned this previously. Some of the bus stops that are featured in the report really wouldn't be appropriate in some of more rural villages, and so they almost need to factor that in whilst having a somewhat uniform approach as well. And then the final point, page 62, relating to Boston College bus driver training. I note that only a small number of bus drivers have been produced from that training so far, but I'm conscious we're only 8 months in. What are we doing to promote that further for young people as a career? Because sort of obviously buses can't run without drivers. We need to be sort of attracting more people. Are we attending careers fairs? Are the college sort of pushing that? And I noted the point about actually mechanics and other maintenance side of role as well, not just the bus drivers. But I think if we want to build this bus service to be sort of one of the best, we've got to have everything in place. And as you say, the Bus Driver Training Academy starts that process, but we've got to increase the number of people coming through to ensure that's sustainable long term. So I wondered what steps we were looking at. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vernon. Over to you, Helen.
Right, just going to go through each point. Yeah, you talked about bus shelters. We have a small scheme where we do give small grants to bus shelters, but I think as a local transport authority, just looking at that whole bus infrastructure and what support and help we can give to that going forward. Public engagement surveys, yes, we for the basic one we did in 2021 went through Let's Talk Lincolnshire. It's the current one in the county news, but just to say we have signed up to Transport Focus's 2024 survey along with about 35 other local transport authorities. So what they actually do is go on the bus and interview passengers, and passengers follow that up. So they will be going at different routes around the county during the year. They used to just do it in a period of September, but they spread that out now. So we should get a draft report next January, and I think the intention is to continue to be part of that Transport Focus survey going forward. So we'll feed that back next year sometime. Child comments, absolutely agree with you about, and that's something we're constantly working at with bus operators through the enhanced partnership. The key operators are part of that partnership, so it's all coming together to look at that big picture for Lincolnshire, not your own business model. So we continue with moving that. They've just signed up to a passenger charter, so we keep working through that medium to try and get that change. Journey planners, so there's various bus operators now have their own app, so they have, if you use one operator, it's quite straightforward to look at that, but there's Travelline and so on and so forth. There's other national journey planning platforms, but I think that's something on our to-do list that we'd like to look at a good journey planner going forward. So I'm sure Stuart will be feeding that back in due course, some more of that detail, but yes, do recognise that. And with the data we send now to the DFT through BODs, and don't ask me to do the acronym, I do know it eventually, but we do a lot of data from operators into a national platform, and then that's supposed to feed the apps out and all the other journeys. So there's been big improvements around data, what operators provide probably in the last 2 to 3 years. So that will continue. Boston College, yes, we're working with the operators to get the drivers need to be part of the bus operator at the moment, so the bus operator in effect sponsors them through that programme. But we have been down to talk to Boston College about promoting transport as a career, And you're right, all the other support services around mechanical support and so on and so forth. So that's something we've raised an aspiration to do going forward, but there's nothing in place at the moment, so that's something we'll be looking at in the future. Thank you, Councillor Vernon.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you, Councillor Vernon. Mike, you want to come
Thank you,
in?
Jim. Can I just add something about the bespoke nature of bush shelters in certain locations? It's something we have been talking about recently because we're aware that some of these sites are in conservation areas, in really rural historic villages. We don't want to create a visible blight, so we are very conscious of that. And to be blunt, it does require a lot more approval in terms of the planning for those kind of locations, those facilities. So we are taking a pragmatic approach, and we don't want to create any kind of blight. So there is a balance to be struck. And on the issue of the app technology, it's something that we are talking to our different partners about in regards to what we can do to create a consistent approach for all operators. We're very conscious that different operators already have different approaches to this, and we don't want to punish or incentivise some businesses when they have different types of spend in this area. But going forwards, we do have, I think this is a real area that we do want to create some consistency in, and with any future funding, it's something that we'll be looking at with a bit more seriousness about how we create a Lincolnshire approach, but it has to be fair on the different operators. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we want to come back, Councillor Vernon.
Just
Yeah.
one point, if I may. Thank you for your additional comments. They were all really useful. I'd just like to add that if you are looking at sort of doing things in very rural areas, conservation areas, I think the key here is going to be to have the support of the parish and town councils, and sort of almost worth having that consultation with them prior to getting to the development stage. What's right in one, where the sort of bus shelter is currently hidden under a beautiful bush and is looks wonderful but isn't visible, they may have quite a strong feeling on how that should be made to be more accessible, at the same time as understanding their constraints as well. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Vernon. Thank you. Yeah, just on the bus shelters and the parishes and towns, the ones that are owned by parishes and towns, some of them are not in a very good condition. But presumably, when we're looking at all the bus shelters, we will be approaching the parishes, or will we, and towns that if we find bus shelters that are not in very good condition, will we be making an approach to those councils to ask them if they're going to do anything about it?
It is something that we've recently started discussing. We are aware of a situation with the City Council, for example, and it's going to take some time to resolve it because there are legal issues. They have certain liability constraints and also budgetary issues. So it's something we are very conscious of, and we are talking to different areas about what can be done to create this consistent set of infrastructure. Okay.
Thank you. I'll move on then to Councillor Ashton, wants to speak.
Thank you. 2 points from me. First of all, picking up on page 37, the selection of core fixed route book services in Lincolnshire. Could I ask what our ambition is to increase the time of the last bus, the last service departure on some of these, appreciating that there's a number here that the last bus departs at 1640 or 1700 or 1710, which strikes me as being less than useful for people who are wishing to use the bus to get to and from work. And I'm really interested that the opposite end of the day, these are services that are starting at 7:15, in some cases at 8 o'clock. At 6:45, so at one end of the day they're starting off at a really useful time for people trying to get to a destination, potentially to work, but at the end of the day it appears from here, and unless there are services that aren't covered here that do pick up these gaps, but it does seem that they are ending really too soon to be properly useful. I'm just wondering either here or in the future what our ambition is to try and extend that. And secondly, just to reinforce the comment that have already been made in respect of consulting with town and parish councils, it is a lot easier to consult in advance of a bus shelter going in than it is to have the row once we've tried building it. And I go a stage further and reinforce what the chairman has just suggested, that actually if we are able to build a proper partnership with our towns and parishes, I know there are towns and parishes out there that are of their own volition looking to put in additional bus shelters and infrastructure. And if there is the opportunity for us and those local councils to work together on this, then perhaps, you know, if we are increasing the quality of the infrastructure on both sides, then we can both take credit for doing so.
Thank you, Councillor Ashton. Do you wish to come?
Just on the first point, yeah, if evenings, early mornings, more frequent, that's an aspiration. So it's looking at it route by route at the moment. So I'll feedback your comments to the network design team. Yeah, so that it's something where they can, they will do. So, but they're looking at it on a route by route basis. Thank you, Councillor Ashton. And your latter point, yes, that's we'd definitely take that up with town and parish councils. Okay.
Right, thank you. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chairman. I think most of our towns at the moment are struggling with footfall. So on page 17, where it says the intertown bus services and improvements or extra services, it's good to see. It's disappointing to see that Spalding's not on the list. Is it possible to give me any reasons why that's not on there? Is there no need for it, or is it funding, or what is it, please?
I think for Spalding, we've already been and enhanced that service because it was run commercially by an operator previously who then handed that in. So then the county council picked up the subsidy for that whole service, and I think it starts quite early and finishes late. So we've already done Spalding. I think that's how we're seeing that. If you've got any particular comments on that, I'm happy to listen and feed that back. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else wishing to speak? No. I've just got one quick thing regarding the proposed improvements to the service, such as increased frequency and real-time information displays. How are we planning to monitor the effectiveness of those measures? I mean, we increase the frequency of the bus service. Presumably, there's going to be some sort of monitoring to see if how that has improved matters.
Yes, as we're putting the interventions in, we'll have monthly data from the bus operators. Everything's all electronic ticket now, so it's reliable and it's accurate. So we'll be gathering that, and at some point in the next few months, we'll be feeding that back about how that's working and so on and so forth, and that'll be incorporated into our transport core performance framework, which we're developing about at these interventions. I think the county news survey is to establish a baseline at this point in time and see whether that improves as well. So they're the measures in place. And of course, the transport focus survey during 2024, they'll be engaging with passengers. They started March, I think it was. No, actually, 1st of April, do apologise. And they'll be carrying that on till about October, November. So they'll be going out and speaking to actual passengers, and we'll be tracking that as well. So if we continue that year on year, we can see that improvement as well.
Thank you for that. Right, we'll move on then. There's no other members speaking, so I'm going to propose that our designated scrutiny officer records the key findings and comments raised by the committee, and I'm going to move that the committee supports the proposed recommendations as these are set out on page 15 of the report, and I ask that the comments raised by this committee be shared with the Executive Councillor for the Executive Councillors for their consideration ahead of the decision being made between the 7th and the 31st of May 2024. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Stokes, thank you. So that's proposed and seconded. Would all those in favour please indicate? Thank you. I think that's unanimous. Have we got anyone against, in case I missed it? And no abstentions. No. Right, that's unanimous. That's carried. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the North Willingham Highways Depot replacement of vehicle store. And this pre-decision scrutiny report and associated appendix can be found on pages 71, 78 of the agenda pack. And the report recommends to the Executive Councillors the procurement of the design of a new storage facility for getting and ploughing vehicles at the North Willingham Highway Depot, for gritting and ploughing vehicles at the North Willingham Highway Depot. The current facility is deemed inadequate and in need of replacement due to temporary repairs carried out in mid-2023. The proposed scheme includes the demolition or removal of existing building, construction of a new, larger store capable of accommodating newer vehicles and their snow ploughs, attachments along with associated electrical and groundworks. A decision will be considered by the Leader of the Council and Executive Councillor for Resources, Communications and Commissioning, and the Executive Councillor for People Management, Legal and Corporate Property between the 3rd and the 7th of May 2024. It is asked that we consider the report and determine whether we support the recommendations to the Executive Council as set out in the report, and that we agree any additional comments to be passed on to the Executive Council in relation to these items. This report will be presented by Matthew Stapleton, Senior Project Manager, and Dave Pennington, Head of Property Development, is also in attendance for this item discussion. So over to you, Matthew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've set out much of the summary of the report. The current vehicle store for gritters at North Willingham near Market Raisin is in an extremely poor condition. It's only still usable because of emergency repairs that were carried out last year, but the steel frame is rotted through because of issues, particularly around the salt that's used on the site. The building is formed mainly of asbestos and quite simply is not fit for purpose currently. The proposal is that the building will be demolished. That will obviously take some considerable work as it is almost entirely formed of asbestos sheeting. The steel frame will be removed and then works will be carried out to create new foundations, install a new larger building which is capable of coping with the larger gritter vehicles. Currently they sit part way out into the yard and are not actually covered by the building, so this new building will be larger to accommodate this. Diversion works are required for the main electricity supply for the entire site, which was found to run across the back of the building, and then new drainage works will be carried out as well. In terms of procurement of the project, the construction is going to be procured via the Pagabo framework, which is a method basically of pre-qualification for contractors. They have been through various checks and best value is guaranteed by using that framework. As it says there, it goes through the bullet points. You have improved predictability of outcomes, efficiency savings. We get the supplier and the contractors in early. They have carried out the design themselves. And also they have to undertake to use local suppliers and labourers. In terms of the scope, as we've said, it will be dismantled and remove the existing building. Electrical supply will be diverted and a new electrical substation created. And an existing vehicle pit will be filled in. That is now redundant and is actually creating quite a hazard. New foundations for a larger frame building will be created and the building itself will then be constructed. All of this has to happen over the summer period, which is part of the reason why the emergency repairs were carried out last year. The gritters operate between October and May. Construction works cannot happen during that period. Obviously, the gritting of the roads is paramount. That has to happen. So we've had to delay until this year. The construction is proposed to take place from May until the start of October. And it is to be noted that the budget for this is already allocated within Corporate Properties Repair and Maintenance Programme. So that is covered within funds that are already allocated. I could take you through the design and approval process, and I could take you through the comments, but I'm mindful, Mr. Chair, of your comments about keeping things short. So really, if there are any questions and queries with regard to the project, I'm happy to take those. Dave, I don't know if you have anything to add on this.
No, thank you, Matthew, and thank you for that report. And yes, members will have read the reports before they come to the meeting, so if they've got any queries, I'm sure they will ask. Have we got anyone wishing to speak on this? No. Right, I would ask on the cost, the 725,000. How has all that been estimated, and how are those costs going forward going to be controlled, given the inflationary pressures within the construction industry that you've outlined? And so it's a case of how is that arrived at, and how are they going to control costs to keep them within budget going forward and make sure things don't run away? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Basically, the costs have been provided by the main contractor, RG Carters, but they have done that in consultation with subcontractors. So they have gone out to the people doing the electrical works, the people supplying the steel frame, carrying out the groundworks, etc. Those are based on quotations that they have received. We asked for 3 quotes, and we can demonstrate those. Those have all been provided by RG Carters as part of this. In addition, our colleagues from Kia Technical Services, who supply professional service to the council, the cost estimators and quantity surveyors have checked through those and compared them to, it mentions in the report, the BCIS register, which is basically industry standard costings for all types of work. So they have compared what RG Carters have submitted and are comfortable and confident that what is quoted within Carter's estimates is reasonable and is achievable. And obviously when a contract is signed with RG Carters, that is the price to which they will be held, unless fundamentally there are issues around what we are requesting that may impact on the budget. Once that contract is signed, that is the price they will be delivering to.
Thank you for that. Still no one indicating, so I'm going to move on then and come to a proposal. Yeah. I'm going to propose that our designated scrutiny officer records the key findings and comments raised by the committee, and I move that the committee supports the report and agrees with the recommendation to the Executive Councillor as set out on pages 73 to 74, and I ask that the committee comments raised by this committee be shared with the Executive Councillor for their consideration ahead of the decision being made. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gibson, thank you. Would all those in favour please indicate? I think that's unanimous, but just in case, is there anybody against? And have we got any abstentions? No. So that's carried then, thank you. I'll move on to the next item on the agenda then, and we come to the Stamford Transport Strategy next. And the report can be found on pages 89 to 162 of the agenda pack and seeks to inform members about Lincolnshire County Council's initiative to develop and publish a new Stamford Transport Strategy. This strategy outlines a comprehensive vision for transportation and travel in and around Stamford up to 2038. Its objectives include expanding travel options, enhancing the transport network, addressing congestion, improving accessibility, promoting sustainable and low-carbon travel, and supporting the town's growth and resilience. Additionally, the strategy aims to preserve Stamford's unique character, enhance its vibrant atmosphere, facilitate access to local service, and promote sustainable development. The strategy area encompasses the historic town of Stamford and its surrounding areas, extending to Uffington and Newstead in the east, bordered by the A1 along the western edge. The committee is invited to consider and comment on the proposed Stamford transport strategy. The report will be presented by Sam Edwards, Head of Highways Infrastructure and Laboratory Services. And over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Chair. And hopefully there'll be as if by magic, Tom's prepared and there's the presentation. So I'm very conscious of your opening comments, Chair, about the busy agenda. So I'll go through this presentation quite quickly. But all this information is in the papers. I'm just picking out the pertinent parts. So next slide, please, Tom. So, as you know, I come to the Scrutiny and give annual updates on transport strategy and how we approach them. This is the 8th one from when we started this. So this is the final one to get all in that place. And it follows the same thread of the process we go through, which is what that slide is showing about understanding the background and the sort of analytical, technical elements of what's taken place, then engaging with the public about what they see as challenges, opportunities, things that are good to build upon, and then looking at those opportunities where we might want to intervene, drafting the vision around that, and then finalising the strategy, which is the step we're at here. Next slide, please. So engagement is a really key part of that. Like I said, there's a lot of information up there, but effectively, we haven't, as officers, gone off and done this by ourselves. This has been done, first of all, with a transport board, the Stamford Transport Board, of which Councillor Richard Davies, the chair, and Councillor Richard Cleaver sits on as well, who's here today. It has district and county members, officers, and has a lot of input, like all the transport boards. As part of that as well, we went out with public engagement events. So actually went out to the public for them to give their view at a number of places, and we got 512 completed surveys back, which is pretty positive actually. And there were a number of stakeholder events with people like National Highways and many others as well. Next slide, please. So the key things that came out of that, I won't read it verbatim on there, but what was really slightly different about the Stamford one compared to others is it wasn't necessarily about hard infrastructure improvements, junction improvements, big roundabouts and the likes. It was more, the themes for me, although they're out there, was about protecting what it is now, building the economy upon that, and providing alternative travel patterns, things like walking and cycling, bus travel, things like that. So it's slightly different to some of the other towns that we've completed the strategies in. Next slide, please. So these were the 4 main challenges that we've sort of gone through all the information, which broadly sort of outlines what I just said about focusing on the environment, so protecting what's there, enabling the sustainable growth, which largely points towards Stamford North, but not in isolation, there's various others. Improving the access, about that's alternative, not in place of, but alternative options around walking and cycling. And then changing, because of the nature of being next to the A1, is the interaction between the A1 and freight and retail. Next slide. So I'm not going to be painful and read that out because it's in the report itself. But again, we've tried to pick up on those key features, which is about protecting the town's historic core and building in those travel choices, not taken away, but trying to give a more balanced choice of how people do want to access. So that's the sort of the vision that we've put forward. Next slide. So again, conscious of time, I'm just going to pick up on what we call the key pillars, so which aligns with the other strategies and the supporting interventions. I've cut short on the presentation on the strategic network enhancements, but that's effectively what we in the district and stakeholders, we can influence third parties like Network Rail, National Highways, others to try and do. It's not necessarily, well, it's almost certainly not on us to implement ourselves. So I'll pick on the key pillars. Next slide. So those are the 5. Again, support what I'm talking about. So walking, cycling, and then walking and pedestrian, then cycling, mobility hubs, local bus service improvement plans, which aligns with the BSIT work that Mike and Helen were talking about earlier, and then your more larger infrastructure and growth around the Stamford North. Next slide, please. I'll go through these quite quickly because I'm conscious they're individual schemes. And what I should say within these are proposals. They are not promises, maybe that's the word, or plans to deliver. This is what we could deliver in the area. And even within those they would need to be investigated about how much they might cost, what's the risk in delivering that, how long, what's the benefit that you get out of doing it. And also being open, some of these, by building, say, for example, wider footways and whatnot, you will take away road space. So you are having to balance back and forth. That's a careful balance to consider. But there's a number of walking and cycling improvements, from crossings to footway improvements through there. Next slide. Equally, a number of cycles, so about the softer side of things, so the higher packages, the supporting infrastructure, and then on the next slide, we get into more of the infrastructure, which could align with the pedestrian movements as well. So they could be one in the same, or they could be separate. And a lot of this will link to the potential Stamford North development too. Next slide. On to mobility hubs. So we've looked at, if you go on to the next one actually, Tom. We looked at sort of 3 locations. One with the Stamford North, which could be integrated into the actual development site that comes along. One is looking at more centralising the local bus, and then the other one is looking at more interchange with the rail facility. Again, principles of what people are saying and can be looked at. Huge amounts of information would need to go, or process would need to go through whether these are taken forward or not. Next slide. Next one covers the last 2. One is about the local bus service improvement plan. I'm not going to say what Mike and Helen did that they've already done far better than I will, but it's along those same things about providing more better frequency or better facilities. And then, as I've touched on, the Stamford North Link Road, making sure that it's not a it's a development that integrates with Stamford, doesn't sit separate to it. And then the next slide is just showing roughly where that road may go as the development. Almost there on the next slide. So this is more the supporting infrastructure. So this is more the sort of, I guess, the construction works, or the things that we could look at. And again, I do stress the could look at. There's a number of themes through there: EV park charging, speed limit reviews, parking packages, park and stride, and then the behavioural management. So if we just quickly go through. Next slide. These are some of the EV charging hubs that some of these are being looked at by the Levi and the Levi 2 bid already as on-street, but they could be developed further if there's an aspiration and, like most of these things, where there's a business need and the reinforcement to the electricity network to support it. Next slide. There was a request in the local community about 20-mile speed limits, speed limit changes, reviews, again, would need to be considered in the whole rather than in isolation, and guidance coming out from central government on things like LTNs and things like that are up in the air. But there's certainly, there was a lot of noise around wanting to review those kind of elements around there, which again would probably link in with things like walking and cycling and providing the networks for that. Next slide. This one again, connected with that, was about reviewing parking. Some of that was about restricting parking or putting in residence parking zones to almost to stick to that carrot, to encourage alternative transport and things like that. And again, review of the on-street parking review. And I'm sure Councillor Cleaver would agree that there's probably, I know, running separate with the District Council reviewing the parking arrangements around there as well. Next slide, almost there. So this was more the sort of the bread and butter, I guess, that some people, which was on the minority for this particular transport, which I agree with from an analytical perspective. But these are sort of junctions and traffic signal improvements that could be investigated into. But the benefit aren't necessarily groundbreaking compared to the alternative travel pattern reviews. And I think the next one is the last slide, which is looking at the supporting infrastructure. This is like park and stride. So again, going back to what the feedback was very much about, wanting to encourage the walking and cycling in the area, is about having areas to park on the outskirts and walk in, not just about bus travel and so forth. So I think that brings the presentation to a close. There's lots more information in the document and so forth, but I just thought I'd try and pick out the key elements for discussion. So I'd invite any questions at this point.
Thank you for that, Sam. Thank you for presenting that good report. And I'm going to come to Councillor Richard Cleaver now as the local member, not member of the committee, but is asked to speak. So I'll give you your 3 minutes at the start of the debate. Over to you, Councillor Cleaver.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to address the committee on this item, the Stamford's Transport Strategy, which is of great importance to the residents and businesses in my Stamford West Division. First of all, I'd like to thank our council officers, both in the public engagement team and in the transport and highways teams, for the highly professional and thorough work they've done in putting the strategy together. I hope the committee will formally record and pass on my thanks. I'm very pleased to see that we've produced a strategy which is so thorough and so comprehensive. It covers all the issues: road, rail, cars, lorries, buses, cyclists, pedestrians, mobility buggies, EV charging, school travel, mobility hubs, congestion, parking, road safety, accessibility, future-proofing and enhancing choice and prioritising active travel, etc., etc. And it does not shy away from mentioning the difficult and controversial issues either. It doesn't have all the answers, but it does ask all the questions and commits to coming up with answers through appropriate assessments, which is good. I'm a great believer in open, evidence-based decision-making. The strategy isn't prescriptive, it's enabling. I think we all see the constant arguments of what are crudely labelled as the pro-car faction and the anti-car faction, which is fine. I always welcome debate. One of the undertones of this strategy is that doing nothing is not an option, and I agree with that. So we mustn't shy away from taking action for fear of upsetting one faction or another. But I truly believe that we can come up with actions from this strategy which will help Stamford to thrive more, whilst improving the quality of life of its residents and improving the attractiveness of the urban environment, and unite most, if not all, sides of the debate as well. And this belief was bolstered by a representation I received only 2 days ago from the Stamford Civic Society, which expressed support for many, many aspects of this strategy. In conclusion, I'd just like to gently lobby the committee on 2 issues which come out in the strategy. The first is improvements to rail services. As a council, LCC has not, I believe, lobbied strongly enough for improved rail services across the county, and I hope that this will improve. Second, the strategy speaks of investigating a number of 20-mile-an-hour zones, which Sam has alluded to. And I hope that LCC will adopt a sensible and measured policy which will enable such schemes to be requested and adopted, not just in Stamford, but where appropriate in towns and villages county-wide. Again, thank you very much for allowing me to come and speak. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cleaver. Right, have we got any other members wishing to speak on this? Councillor Vernon.
Thank you, Chairman. I've read this report and I think it's really, really interesting. I visit Stamford frequently and yeah, I think there's some really good points on there. Sort of notable points that I've picked up, I think extending the Call Connect services into Peterborough will be great. I agree that EV charging points do need to be looked at to be increased. I'll be sort of honest, I'm not entirely sure this stage about sort of pedestrianising areas of Broad Street, but I'll wait for further information on this. I just think that's something that sort of we do need to look at quite carefully. I love the idea of cycle hire hubs, and I think that they would be brilliant, especially to have the joined up approach with local Rutland Water. I think it would definitely take some joined up working, but there's a real opportunity here to have people turning up on the improved railway services into Stamford Station and being able to get off into sort of the countryside and beyond, really. So I think that's fantastic. The park and ride, the stride cycle, I also think is great, and I think there's a lot of capacity there to work with the bus operators to streamline the amount of traffic that is actually entering Stamford. It can be very, very busy in the mornings coming through Ryle Road and coming from Uffington, and I think if there's an opportunity to try and sort of move people off one bus perhaps onto another, or perhaps for them to stride or cycle, fantastic. So yeah, I was really impressed with the report, and I think, as you say, it's a really good starting point to move forward on, so thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Vernon. Have we any other members wishing to speak? No. I've just got a quick one for Sam, and it speaks about collaborative efforts in the report, and could you enlarge a bit more on the collaborative efforts between the County Council and South Kesteven District Council as far as developing the transport strategy and how that will work going forward, please?
Yeah, like with all the transport strategies, we've approached this from a perspective of the public who do not care whose county or district, they don't care about barriers, it's about what they want to utilise in the area. And some of these difficult change principles can't be done by one party or the other because there is a synergy that goes between them, between, say, parking and road travel. So it's very, very clear that the district and the county need to work closely together, which they have. And I'm thankful to say on all the transport strategies we do across the county, it's got that common theme that all wanting to work in one direction. It can't work any other way. Otherwise, when it comes to want to do a project or an initiative or a drive, you have challenges before you've even started. So there's nothing that we've put in this document that hasn't already been through the Transport Board. There's no surprises, as with all the other transport strategies, that everyone's aligned to the principles at both a political and officer level as well on both sides. So I feel that's sort of true collaboration. About where now, when it comes to implementing these things, now that it will need its own, project wants to be taken forward. The right party needs to be picked when you get into the detail about who is best to lead that going forward, based on their skills and abilities and funding, maybe. But that's the other thing that I suppose I didn't talk about in here is similar to what Mike and Helen talked about, is having the BSIP in place so that if a funding opportunity comes along, you've got the base of the information to support that. That's exactly what this is about. So this isn't somebody's idea or my idea. This is grounded in evidence of what people want. So you've got a much greater opportunity to secure funding in what you're doing.
Thank you, Sam. And just on the point that Councillor Cleaver made about lobbying for rail service improvements, how are we going to do that going forward? Because it is a difficult one, that.
I think, yes, it is very difficult. That comes as part of the bit that I didn't go through in the presentation, is that strategic supportive interventions around lobbying to national highways, for example, around improvements to the A1, to the rail authorities about providing more facilities or improving the infrastructure there as well. We do that. We do that regularly as a county council through our rail officers and meet regularly with them. And I think there's an item in the future about Network Rail coming to this scrutiny committee as well. It's one of those things. It is lobbying. It needs to go on for a period of time and come from various different routes, not just the county council, but the district, but stakeholders, businesses, all those that demand it and build from an evidence base rather than it being a motive. We really need the evidence to prove that it's needed and what the benefits are to all.
Thank you, Sam. And on the 20-mile-an-hour zones, we have a scrutiny panel B who are looking at those policies at the moment, and so we'll have to leave with that with them for the time being. Councillor Wright, I understand you would like to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Sam, just picking up on what you said about relationships and people working together, authorities. That's great, and they say the public don't care, but the public also don't understand policies and regulations that actually stop us from doing things. So this isn't just the Stamford, this is across the transport plans. There is a real aspiration for cycle routes and walk routes, but we know that the regulations on the width for cycle paths now mean that a lot of our historic towns and villages, that can't be realised because we simply can't fit it into the space required. So I'm obviously thinking of another town where we know we've now got a choke where we can cycle most of the way in and then it stops. So is there any possibility of really lobbying government with regards to, it's fine having designs that fit big urban cities that can just shave a bit of a road off a road and they've got the space, but it means that these will be forever aspirational in our towns, in our parts of rural Lincolnshire, because unless they change it, we know we can't attract the government funding to help us implement them. So it remains an aspiration, and that's not really great, is it, trying to explain to the public why we can't realise their aspirations?
Quite a while. Quite a wide discussion topic. So what we're going at is there's a document came out a couple of years ago called LTM 120 from the DFT that suggested a design standard, which, as you say, Councillor Wright, has very wide footways, which is almost impossible to implement within, for example, a historical town like Stamford. There's been a lot of national pushback against that particular document. I think the principles are sound about connecting communities, but there are restrictions. There are genuine physical restrictions around building something to attract people to it and knocking someone's house or a number of historical houses down that may be listed. The DFT are listening to that pushback, but as you say, some may argue it's been written for large metropolitan urban environments, which Lincolnshire is not, and there is a drive and a call for better rural or bespoke rural guidance for things like this. What I will stress is LTM 120 is a guidance document. It's not a regulatory document. There's nothing to say that you can't go outside it, but at the moment the DFT are saying if there is funding going towards a scheme a scheme that they funded, they would expect to see this implemented. What I would say is I'm starting to get feels of relaxation towards that because things aren't happening in certain areas just as you described. So I suspect things will move further with that over the coming years, or months and years.
Thank you. Have we any other comments? No. Right, I'm going to move forward then. And I will thank officers, members of the councils and everyone involved in preparing this strategy and developing and preparing it along the lines that Councillor Cleaver mentioned in his comments. And so if we could combine that into the minutes of the committee meeting, please, that would be good. And I'm going to move that the committee endorse the report and strategy, and I ask that the comments raised by this committee be shared with the relevant officers in support of the strategy implementation. Does anyone dissent? No one dissents, so that is agreed then. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Transport Q3 Performance Report 2023-24. This quarterly performance report is found on pages 163 to 168 of the agenda pack. The report provides the committee with a summary of performance for Q3 in relation to the Council's transport services, including local bus services and education travel. The committee is invited to consider and comment on the detail of the report and recommend any changes or actions to the Executive Member for Highways, Transport and IT. Mike Reid, Head of Transport, and Helen Reeks, Support Services Manager, will present this report. So over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't go through the report word for word because I assume you've read it and you're interested in the kind of a wider debate. So just to give you the general picture regarding passenger transport, it is a very challenging landscape. We have very big, substantial budgetary pressures. This is mainly due to increase in operator costs and the increase in number of children who are being classified as special educational needs, which is problematic for ourselves. Obviously, each child is different and has different needs, but that is something that we have to deal with on the ground on a daily basis, and it does create this financial pressure when we're having to go out very last minute looking at which operators can move children from home to school. So it is really challenging. It's not just a local issue; it's a national issue. But we still managed to successfully move 19,000 passengers per day, and that's something that we don't discuss enough, and we don't promote that as a big positive. And we do, obviously, we get a lot of kind of scrutiny about budgets, but I think we can't forget that we are actually enabling 19,000 kids to get to school, kids and adults, to their place of education on a daily basis. So in that context, there is we do receive complaints. We do receive a relatively minor amount of complaints. I think many of the complaints are around eligibility and parents arguing that they should be eligible for home to school transport, where our policy doesn't meet their initial requirement. So where the complaints escalate into more of a formal approach, this is where we see it in the figures which are represented on the graph. But it's one thing that is obvious, that is looking at this report, this is essentially, it's an overview of what the service does, and what I want to do and what I've challenged the team to do is come up with more performance measures that we can report into Scrutiny Committee. So we're working at the moment to produce better KPIs which are evidence-based, and it measures performance within the service. And that's something I'm hopeful that we can have within Q2 of this year. And it's something that we're working closely with our corporate teams to actually produce these for the corporate plan, and have a series of key performance indicators which come out for the public to see, so that we can actually give that wider context. So I think it's fair to say that we have got a lot of work to do. We do work extremely hard. The team are working extremely hard, but it's something which we are continuously trying to improve. And in future committees, we will be a bit more, provide more transparency in terms of those KPIs that I've mentioned. But for now, it's just kind of, we're doing the work behind the scenes. So I'll leave it there. I'll leave the floor open for comment, but it's something that I'm very conscious that we are doing a lot of work that may satisfy future needs of how we transparently talk about what we're doing and how we perform. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mike, for the report. Have we got any members wishing to speak on this? Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chair. One of the issues I've got with buses is that when a bus doesn't turn up, for some reason it's, me being a county councillor, it's my fault. When I try to explain to them that bus companies are private companies, they don't seem to register that. They seem to think that the county council are in charge of, everything. This goes back to the devolution thing, where all these examples were given about Manchester and how wonderful they are. But I believe their bus companies controlled by their own authority. So if we did that, there would be no problems, or would there still be problems?
Over to you, Mike, if you can answer that one. But
I think it's fair to say there will always be problems. Issues always occur with breakdowns or traffic works, and you can never completely guarantee that a service, whether it's a locally delivered service by the local authority, or whether it's a private sector company, issues always occur, unfortunately. But I think part of the issues we talked about earlier in tracking and monitoring on an app-based system and real-time information, that will help in future if we've got any kind of issues and disruption on the service. But unfortunately, I think we've got to be pragmatic and admit that there will always be failures, and it's ultimately, there are a lot of moving parts in this whole service. Thank you.
Thank you, for that, Mike, for that. Thank you. Any other comments on this? I mean, there's obviously a lot of work going into the transport and everything, and especially with educational travel. I mean, there's a lot of challenges there. What work is going on to mitigate the impact of the external factors, such as national living wage, inflationary pressures, etc., on educational transport? How are we sort of trying to mitigate those issues? Please.
It is extremely difficult. Thank you, Chairman. It's extremely difficult because we are at the behest of what operators want to charge. But one thing that we're doing is we're reviewing very regularly the contracts that we've got and essentially shopping round. So I don't want to say that we're kind of playing operators off against each other, but we're looking at more e-auction type software, a bit like eBay, a greater rollout and usage of that, where we can get more real-time reflective bids coming in for particular transport needs. And it's something that we're hopeful if we can promote this wider and use it a different platform to the one that we've already got, we'll have more ability to deal with that. But another thing that we need to engage better with taxi operators to understand what their pressure points are, why they're not providing more competitive prices. I think in the past we have been quite treated them at arm's length, but we need to engage with them better and understand what their issues are, because we want a kind of really narrow band of prices actually reflected back to us. But at the moment we get prices back which are 100-200% times each other on a daily basis, it shows that for some of these businesses we're not that attractive, and it's understanding from the operators how we can get them to be more competitive. So it is really challenging, because ultimately we don't control how many kids come into the system, and a lot of the time we're reacting to that on a daily basis. But it's all about talking to the different operators in different areas and just having that kind of engagement where they understand our pressure points, what we need, and we understand what their issues are. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mike. And just one more quick one. I mean, it's really good that the number of complaints has gone down. And is there anything in particular that we've been doing that you could say have resulted in that reduction in complaints?
I think I'm not particularly comfortable with the way this is presented as complaints, because these are not necessarily complaints about staff or performance or anything that the service is doing wrong. A lot of this is complaints which are based around the policy. So it's parents who don't agree with the policy or don't understand the policy. One thing that we are looking to do is engage better with schools and parents up front, so that they can understand that when a parent makes, say, a preference on a school, they have to appreciate the policy on home to school transport and factor that into their decision making. Because what we're finding is that parents might be choosing a school which is 10 miles away and not realising, or realising too late, that actually there are a lot of schools closer which could provide a similar provision of education, which may actually, it's more sustainable, but they may actually be funded and be eligible for home to school transport. But choosing a school based on purely the perceived merits of the school, to me is not sustainable, because people need to be made more aware that there is a consequence when it comes to transport of their children. So it's something we've started working closer with schools, and we need to do more engagement and better education with parents. Okay.
Thank you for that. And that's a good point, and it's good to see that those are the sort of steps we're taking to have people more informed decisions. Thank you. No more indications to speak, so I'm going to move on then, and I'm going to move that the report be received by this committee and that our satisfaction be recorded on the performance achieved to date. And I ask that the comments raised by this committee be shared with the Executive Councillor for his consideration by relevant officers. Does anyone dissent? No. So nobody indicating. No, that's agreed. Thank you. We'll move on then. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike and Helen, for that. Right, the next item on the agenda is the Road Safety Partnership Annual Report. And this scrutiny report is found on pages 169 to 212 of the agenda pack. The report aims to update committee members on fatal and serious injury KSI casualty figures for Lincolnshire, highlighting trends, comparisons and priority areas. The report highlights the significant challenge of fatalities and serious injuries recorded on Lincolnshire's roads in 2023 and provides insight into the financial cost in addition to the devastating consequences to our residents and communities. Additionally, the report underscores the importance of road safety promotion and support, aligning with key priorities outlined in the Community Safety, Policing and Criminal Justice Plan for Lincolnshire 2021-2025, published by the Lincolnshire Police and Crime Commissioner. The committee is invited to consider and comment on the report and highlight any recommendations or further actions required, and seek assurances on the work being undertaken by the Road Safety Partnership to reduce the number of people killed and injured on county roads. And the report will be presented by Steve Batchelor, the Lincolnshire Road Safety Partnership Senior Manager. So over to you, Steve, and welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everybody. Key points from the report this year is that we continue to see a steady decrease in the number of people killed and seriously injured on the roads of Lincolnshire to 426 in 2023. This is the lowest figure we have seen since 2015. However, there was still 48 people killed last year, which remains far too many and clearly demonstrates there's much work still to be done. The majority of our serious and fatal accidents in Lincolnshire occur on the rural road network as opposed to the urban. Casualties are more likely to be male. Collisions are distributed throughout the whole of the county, but the highest percentage is in East Lindsey. And the highest risk groups remain high-powered two-wheel motor vehicles, young drivers between the ages of 17 and 24 years, and mature road users over the age of 60 plus years. Despite an overall decrease in the number of people killed and seriously injured, we did see rises in pedestrian, pedal cycle and child KSI casualties. However, we did also see decreases in some of the other high priority groups, including the motorcycle riders, 60-plus-year-old drivers and 17 to 24-year-old drivers. The report also outlines the planning that we're currently undertaking for the 2025 Road Safety Strategy, which looks to introduce the safe system approach to road safety in Lincolnshire, trying to ensure that everybody who has any potential influence over road safety works together to reduce the number of people killed and seriously injured. A few key points in terms of the actions that we've taken in the last year. We continue to deliver accident investigation and prevention engineering works throughout the network. We continue to see an expansion in the community speedwatch scheme with now more than 1,350 volunteers monitoring vehicles on the side of the road, and those monitoring sessions resulting in warning letters being sent to motorists who have strayed above the speed limit. We delivered the DFT Safer Roads project on the A631, A1084 and A18, and they've all been completed. And we've introduced since 2021 and seen a continual growth in Operation SNAP, which last year saw 2,182 submissions from members of the public, putting forward dashcam footage of perceived offences, and this did result in 652 of those being processed as offences, and an additional 583 warning letters sent to drivers. Types of offences that we're detecting through that system include due care and attention, not being in reasonable consideration to other road users, failure to comply with traffic light signals and red crosses, and failure to comply with solid white lines and mobile phone use. So as you can see, there's a wide range of serious offences that could potentially lead to devastating consequences that we're now being made aware of and we're now able to take action on. Last couple of points then is that we delivered national driver offender retraining courses to more than 20,000 people last year. We've reintroduced Bike Safe into the county, which allows for assessed rides and theory training to be given to motorcyclists. The Biker Down training was started in 2023, being delivered by Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue through the Road Safety Partnership. And we continue to do a wide range of primary and secondary education in schools, as well as delivering our Too Fast Too Soon theatre production to people between the ages of 16 and 18. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for the report, and it is truly great that there is a decrease in the number of people killed and seriously injured on that stat, and really pleasing to hear that. Are there any other members of the committee? Councillor Wright would like to speak.
Thanks, Chairman, and thanks for the report, Steve. And on one level, it's good news, isn't it? But it reports on, this is straight data rather than other things that could happen. So, a couple of questions really. One with, I think it's page 180, with regards to what we teach or try to get older pupils to take on board with regards to preparing for driving. Do you cover within that about drug driving and drink driving? Because I find if you go and ask young people at the moment, you could take a selection of young people and ask them what's the limit to what they can drink before and drive, and you will get some absolute urban myths out there about what actually constitutes a safe level. That it doesn't seem to be robust from what I can see. A lot of young people don't realise that drug driving is just as bad as drink driving. Not that it's just young people that take drugs, but it's about that awareness again. And this obviously, your report covers accidents, but seen as the police are a partner, could the report not also include just the raw data on convictions for road offences that have included, especially drink and drug driving, because that paints a slightly different picture. Whereas it's by the grace of God go I, as with regards to there could have been actually, you know, worse stats, because I think that's very important for people to be able to take on board the extent of what's still going on across the county with regards to the level of drink and drug driving.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Steve?
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor. Yes, those topics of drink and drug driving are raised with that age group. We're trying to tackle all of the potential issues that people are going to be faced when either a driver or as a passenger, because of course that can have a big influence on whether collisions occur and what's going on in the vehicle as well. So those topics are covered in schools, and yep, absolutely happy to, assuming they'll let us have it all, publish offence data alongside the other information we have in the Road Safety Partnership report. Some of our police staff are a part of specialist stops and the roads policing unit within Lincolnshire Police, so it is relevant. I've always tried to not take credit for work that we're not doing, so just focus on the things that we are doing or are being done through the Road Safety Partnership. But I think building that picture and showing the other work being done by our parent organisations and partners is also really important, so I'll make sure that's in for next year as well.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for that suggestion, Councillor Wright. Thank you. Councillor Vernon.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your report. I'd like to just ask a little bit more about how we are, excuse me, targeting specific groups. So obviously we have this over 60s group who are sort of not at school, probably not sort of necessarily in academies, colleges, universities and whatnot. How are we actually reaching out to educate them more about the dangers that are on the road? And alongside that, I think there is a place here for more widespread community engagement rather than just being in schools and academies. I hate to say this, my daughter is obviously an angel, but she is 10 years old, and I suspect that as I move into the teenage years, there's a chance that she may not pay as much attention in her school lessons as I would like her to. But as a parent, if there were to be a road safety partnership event taking place in a local community hall that was open to all, I can absolutely assure you that she would be there and paying attention. So I wonder if there is sort of scope here to look at slightly more outside the box where you could then engage on sort of obviously over 60s, perhaps coming along to a community location just to try and increase engagement further. I think what you're doing already with sort of local employers, the NHS, cycling and walking groups is great, but I'd love to see a little bit more taking place to access other aspects of the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vernon. Steve?
Thank you, Councillor. We were having this discussion around mature drivers this morning before I left the office, actually, and it remains one of the hardest target groups for us for lots of different reasons. But of course, Lincolnshire continues to be an attractive place to come and retire. We do have a higher percentage of people of retirement age than the national average, and with it being a large rural county, clearly travel is such a significant part of continue to having, you know, a flourishing life even after retirement. So how do we make sure that is safe? We have and continue to deliver driving courses, trainer courses that we've delivered free to mature drivers, although we do have some debate about somebody being over the age of 60 being considered mature. I think it's simply because it aligns with the Department for Transport's statistics. But that physical training and allowing people to go and speak to other people, understand some of the issues and the problems is really important. We also put out information through GP surgeries, working with our NHS partners, because again, it's a good way of getting in and getting those messages across, but it still is challenging and there's more that we can do. So we will continue to look at what we can do to improve on that area for sure. In terms of children, we have the direct engagement through schools, as I've highlighted. We do have a dedicated events team at the Road Safety Partnership, so their job is to go out and find places where they can be of use, be that big shows like the Lincolnshire show or Heckington show, down to smaller things like bike nights, etc. So there's a limit to what we can do. But there's certainly scope for adding in some of those community engagement events. We are currently looking at the content on our website, because I think through social media channels and the website there's a way in which we can get much more across, especially to the younger target audiences. And we also have quarterly newsletters that go out to parents of every pupil in the county, at both primary and secondary schools as well. We took a pause for a redesign, but that'll be coming back in the next couple of months as well. So that goes directly out to parents too. So I agree with you. There's more that we can do, but I think we've got quite a lot that we are able to do at the same time.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask one further question on what you're saying about sending out newsletters to directly to the parents of children, which I think is fantastic. Will you be also sending those out to children who are attending alternative provision and also independent schools locally as well?
We send them to all of the schools regardless, yeah.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Councillor Vernon. Right, I've got Councillor Ashton would like to speak.
Thank you. Do we keep, or do we have available, a breakdown of our success measured in terms of individual locations and individual roads? I appreciate in our paper referring to the average speed cameras introduced at Burwell on the A16, and I think one of the most visual signs of activity in this area is the proliferation of average speed cameras on what are now many of our major routes around the county. And I would just like to be able to understand more accurately just how successful those been. I mean, I feel they probably are feeding through into the headline figures that they are working, but I think it would be really useful to understand to what extent they are doing so. As I say, many of these routes historically have been covered by individual cameras, which I see our upgrade programme now takes those to average where we've been able to do it. And it would be really useful to know whether that's working as well as I feel it probably is, but I can't seem to extract that data from what we've got in front of us.
Thank you, Councillor Ashton. Steve, and save me asking something later while you're answering that on speed cameras. Could you just outline how cases are made to have a speed camera site? Because a lot of the public out there, their solution to a problem as soon as there's accident is speed cameras, and it would be useful to outline how a case for a speed camera is made and justified.
Thank you, Councillor, for the initial question. You're right. The upgrade programme that we've been undertaking, moving from wet film cameras to digital cameras, has allowed us the opportunity to look and reassess locations and see whether or not the technology that was in place remains the best. And on some occasions, particularly where it's a rural road and a long straight road, we've been able to implement average speed camera systems as an alternative to those fixed point cameras. On average, I will get the specific figures and make sure it's in the minutes, but it's 40+% reduction in the number of people killed and seriously injured at sites where you compare the 3 years before to the 3 years after. Some significantly better than that as well, but that is the minimum in terms of all of our fixed and average speed camera sites. 80% of fatal accidents happened last year on AMB road networks, on the rural network, and it was 96% in 2022. I think that's why so much of what we're doing in terms of the enforcement activity with average and fixed cameras tends to be on those types of roads. In terms of getting speed enforcement, as you've highlighted, communities often tell us that they have concerns. The first thing that we do at every single site is that we will put a 7-day speed survey in. That will provide us the number of vehicles and the speed of every single vehicle that travelled through and the time at which they travelled. That allows us then to look at the average speed of those vehicles, the number of people exceeding the speed limit, the percentage that are going 10 mile an hour above, and all of those types of factors. So it gives us a real sense, an in-depth sense of what is happening. We'll then assess all of the collision data, if there is any, for that location, find out firstly how many there are in the location we're looking at, but also the nature of them, so what were the causation factors for each of those collisions. We then apply the Department for Transport guidance on the introduction of speed cameras, and it will either meet or it will not, and that's how we determine whether or not a site would be suitable. When it comes to mobile speed cameras, we have a bit more flexibility. We can factor in community concern, and we do so. But similarly, there are so many locations that are raised to us. We always have at least one collision within the boundaries that we're looking at, and there's always some really high speeds. So sometimes we're not able to service the requests because it hasn't met the criteria for the fixed or the average speed cameras. And once you get down to mobiles, the problem just isn't as bad as they perceived it to be when they were making a request. But on every occasion, we will go back with a report, outline our findings, and let them know why we've made that decision.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Ashton, that's okay. Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. You answered most of the questions, but the one about schools and targeting groups, it don't matter if it's male or female, young or old, when you get parents outside of school, or everything about the highway code goes out the window. You say about newsletters, and I appreciate the fact you send newsletters, but newsletters are only good if people's going to read them. So it's an ongoing issue, and you know, I often hear it's, at all schools at Lincolnshire, well, that's no excuse, it should be dealt with. The police isn't a complete waste of time if you ring them up about anything outside school. But the question I was going to ask you, someone asked me this, on a speed camera, if you're going down a hill on a push bike at high speed, will you set it off?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, we've had some high speeds. Not always wearing protective clothing as well, but yeah, in Lincoln, as you know, Crossercliff Hill is a good example where any vehicles going down would set that off. Clearly, there's no vehicle registration plate on a motorcycle, on a pedal cycle. Sorry, so no action can be taken from that, but it would do. Just coming back to your point in relation to schools, we are currently investigating the feasibility of setting up some a charter that schools can buy into, that parents can then be asked to participate in. Whilst I accept some of the points you make in terms of authorities and agencies having a part to play, I think fundamentally it is the role of the parents who are going to these schools who need to be aware of the safety of the pupils and the actions they're taking and the impact it has. So I think the biggest thing we can do is try and stop them from parking inconsiderately or illegally, or for exceeding the speed limits when they're going and travelling there. Where that isn't the case, I think there's a reasonable expectation that some action will be taken, be that through parking enforcement from the County Council or Lincolnshire Police when they're causing an obstruction or it's dangerous. And we're working very closely with our partners to try and make sure that we do start to really make a difference in this area, because it's one of the areas that we get the most correspondence about.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, moving on then, Councillor Gibson.
Thanks, Chairman. And thank you for the report. It's, there's a lot of detail in there, which is nice to see. It's nice and easy, clear and easy to read, actually. I think you said, I can't quite see it, but I think you said that most accidents happen in East Lindsey, or a high percentage. Is that correct? And then looking through the report, page 193 says that most accidents happen between 2 and 5. Page 194 says most accidents are when it's fine without high winds. And page 196 say 21, so nearly half of the accidents. Oh no, sorry, 21 out of 64 accidents are careless, reckless, in a hurry, aggressive. It all seems to be pointing in one sort of direction. People heading to the coast on a nice day and not thinking and being reckless. I visited Skegness last week with my boss, and she said it feels a bit like stepping back in time driving to Skegness because the road network isn't quite as good as the rest of our county. What do we have planned for the future to try and improve that? On obviously future, and then short-term measures. Do we have any think bike type ideas for that part of our area of Lincolnshire? You know, if we had signs up saying most accidents happen between 2 and 5 when it's dry, and it might just make drivers think, oh, hang on a second, that's me driving a bit too reckless. Just an idea.
Over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much for your question, Councillor. I just want to clarify that in the report it outlines that fatal and serious collisions are distributed widely throughout the whole of the county, but the highest percentage was in East Lindsey. I wouldn't want to give the impression that it's sort of most of them happening there. In 2023, it was 27% that happened in East Lindsey. To give you a comparison, West Lindsey was 19.2% and North Kesteven was 12.2%, South Kesteven 18.1%. So there is a fair distribution, but it is more. You're right, that part of the road network does have unique problems. I think primarily the mixture of vehicles and road users that are on there, including agricultural vehicles, heavy and light goods vehicles, motorcycle users of varying power, tourists who may not know the area so well, caravan users. There's such a mixture of vehicles using what is, you know, a rural road network as opposed to dual carriageways and things of that nature, and it does make it very difficult for us to try and help reduce the number of people who are killed and seriously injured on there. We are working with our partners in that area through the police, the local district councils, for example, but that, I think every year I come to this committee and that still has a slightly higher percentage than everywhere else, so clearly more needs to be done. We do still use the Sunny Side Up partnership motorcycle posters or signs that go onto the road network. So what we do each year is look through and look at where the locations that the collisions have been happening involving motorcyclists, and then put up specific warning signs to highlight the type of causation factor that's happening in those locations. But I think other than the education piece, engineering out the problems where it's appropriate to do so, and enforcing the locations where people aren't behaving in the way in which they should on the roads, it comes a point where we're probably not seeing the reductions that we want. And I don't have an answer other than to be doing more of those types of things, and in the most targeted way that we possibly can. I'm not sure if that entirely answers the question. I think the points you've raised in terms of, you know, pointing us in the right direction and things we should be focusing on, I think we are doing those, but it's about doing as much of it as we possibly can and making sure it's targeted in the right direction so that we reach as many people as possible.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, Councillor Gibson. Move on then to Councillor Ashley Morris. Paula.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just actually going back to a couple of remarks ago. Do you actually use the electoral roll to locate and contact basically 17-year-olds who are just coming up to voting age? It's a very simple system that, I mean, I know a lot of political parties use, and hello, welcome to our lovely MP. But it's a very, very reliable system for getting hold of 17-year-olds who are potentially, obviously, young drivers, with the sort of gypsy's warning about, you know, try not to drive when you're hammered. That may be a really simple solution rather than bit and piece. And I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of value in schools and everything else. But, I mean, to quote my youngest son, who's a lecturer at college, the parents you see at school that take an interest in everything else aren't necessarily the ones you want. It's t'others. So maybe that might be a system that could be utilised. I mean, it's sort of, we certainly have copies of it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Steve?
Thank you, Councillor. No is the answer. We don't use that tool, so that is something for us to consider in the future. I think one of the points you made there is probably one of the most important points in terms of everything in this area, in that in pretty much everything we do, the ones that we really need to connect with, the ones that we need to make the difference, aren't the ones who want to come forward and be working with us and helping us. So be that motorcycle training, for example, it's not generally the ones who want to come and pay to do training with us that we're that concerned about. It's the ones who really don't want to be involved. And it's not the 17-year-olds who will sit through our Too Fast, Too Soon theatre production and get quite emotional and impacted by it and really tell us how much it's made a difference to them going forwards. It's the one who are probably sat there thinking more about what's on their phone and not wanting to engage as well. So in every single area, that's always our challenge, is how do we really get through to these people? I think we at various points throughout the curriculum at primary, secondary and through Too Fast, Too Soon, we are having an opportunity to engage with every single pupil in Lincolnshire. So I think it's probably a bit better than bitting and bobbing, but one half-an-hour session, for example, may not be what is required to make the difference. So every opportunity that we can get to keep repeating it and coming back again and doing it in interesting, in innovative ways. If we're trying to communicate with a 17-year-old in the same way that we are for a 60-year-old mature driver, then that's not got to work as well. So I think the other thing is working with others throughout the whole of the UK, understanding what they're doing in this area, making sure that we copy some of the best ideas and come up with our own, and then again trying to make sure we really get that repeated influence on that age group and make a difference going forwards.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Any other? Councillor Wright, Richard Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to come back. It was going to be one comment, but it's another one as well now, Steve. You talked about engineering out, and in regards to motorcycle incidents, I don't think you can engineer out idiots that pull out at junctions and think your bike can stop inside 6 feet, because that's where I find the most issues. Most people seem to think, for some reason, my motorbike can just stop. I don't know why, but and this county seems to be far worse than anywhere else that I ride as well. So I don't know what that is, but quite often they do. They just pull out and they think that you're on a bike. It's some kind of magical machine. So you'll never engineer that out. It's very rare that I hear something that I think don't even go there. We don't even waste any money on it. I'd like to know that the charter for schools is going to have zero cost, because no matter how you try to engage with, and I don't want to label all parents, people that drop pupils off at school, let's call them that, no matter what schemes you put in place, they still do it. So you can have walking crocodiles that you actually part fund at a very nearby spot, but the first drop of rain or a slightly dark cloud, and it means that those yellow lines no longer mean no parking. It means I'm only doing it briefly, what does it matter? So for everybody that signs up to the charter, all those that don't will carry on doing it because it's not enforceable. It did come before this committee, I'm not sure, was it 2 or 3 meetings ago? We were told it was being looked at about enforcement cameras that can be fitted outside schools, that will be there on a permanent basis at the worst occurring areas. It's only by enforcing that we're going to stop it. I will name a school, the William Alvey School. It's not the school's fault, but there was new enforcement lines have been down weeks there, and already they're starting to be ineffective with some people. They now think that what that means is it's provided a new parking space for them that other people aren't using. So, we've gone from maybe 1 or 2 when the lines were extended, to I drove past the other day and there was 8 cars again on clearly marked do not park here lines. And I would say that all of those are dropping children off at school who will either sign the charter and lie or not sign it at all. So unless we know that as charters can be effective, I would hate to think that too much time and resources are being put into them.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. It's a difficult balancing act, because at the moment, invariably, what we do is go back and say either there isn't as big a problem as you think, or there's nothing we can do about it. And I don't think either of those two things are particularly helpful or useful. Luckily, the number of people, children injured outside of schools is relatively low. It's more of a perception of a problem than an actual problem. Now, there are some, And clearly we all want to protect children, and it's tragic whenever there is an incident. But the problem is not as widespread as people might expect. So I think there is, I'm not responsible for enforcement outside of schools for parking, but we do work with our colleagues who are very closely. I do think it's vital that where we identify particular problems and there is a temporary traffic regulation order in place so that it's enforceable, that action is taken where that problem is identified, because as you've highlighted, otherwise people will just ignore it. But I still also believe that we need to provide something, a product, a service to those schools so they can try and help themselves, because at the moment they'll come to us and say, what are you going to do? And sometimes there isn't anything that we can do, I think. But if we can accept that as parents, you are the ones who are telling us you have a problem with safety outside of your schools, yet you are the ones who are making the problem in the first place. So there has to be an element of social responsibility. And I think giving schools something, products that they can then talk to their parents with and about, and get them to sign up and take an element of civic duty is something that's worth trying, but also recognising it's no substitute for undertaking enforcement when people aren't listening and aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. So I do think there should be a blend, but it's not going to be something that costs lots of money. It's more our investment in time to create content that people will want to get involved with and will want to disseminate, and then making sure it's frequently updated so that it's fresh in the minds of the schools and the parents.
Thank you, Steve. Yes, you want to come back, Councillor Wright?
Just briefly, yeah, I'd like to be proven wrong if that's the case. So will there be an evaluation on where charters are put in place?
I think it would make sense, absolutely. Although what I would say is that there isn't going to be a criteria to sign up to it, so it doesn't necessarily mean that just because you say you have a problem, there is a problem. We're not going to have a benchmark or a measure in that sense. So this is more anybody, like our community speedwatch scheme. Anybody can sign up and get involved through the schools, assuming that they want to. So measuring the sort of whether there was a problem before or after is not as straightforward as like a speed camera location where there has been X number of collisions and they've now reduced. But I think there are things that we will be able to measure and evaluate, and we will do that as part of this.
Thank you for that. I'm going to go to Councillor Ashley Morris, who wants to come back again.
Yeah, this is actually a slightly different point, Mr. Chairman. I recall at a previous meeting of this committee, something was mentioned about cameras outside schools that would actually be enforceable, because obviously all the yellow lines in the world and some of the schools in my area have got every conceivable thing, but obviously it's not enforceable. It can be occasionally, but as we've all noticed, the minute the enforcement cars sort of thinned out, everyone goes back to normal behaviour. Is there any development in that direction? Because I'd be delighted to be able to let people know that it might be at some point. And I think this would have meant if anyone parks, their car number is picked up and there is actually an enforceable, I would presume, penalty. Perhaps you could elucidate.
I think that is our enforcement side, that looking at the cameras outside of schools, and when they came to a recent meeting, they say that was something that was going to be looked at going forward. And the other thing is we've got the review of our traffic management policies ongoing with Scrutiny Panel B at the moment, and where the results of that are going to be forthcoming at the end of July at the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee at the end of July. So there's a lot of stuff there that is, being looked at. Steve, did you want to add to that?
No, as I say, I don't have responsibility for that business area, but we are a part of the traffic management policy reviews and are feeding in information about our concerns outside of schools and locations where there's problems, where it's appropriate to do so, and liaising with our colleagues who do have that responsibility too.
Thank you. Councillor Clark, you wish to come in again?
Thank you, Chair. Not to prolong this, and you realise we can go on about parking outside school all day long, but when parents park outside school, it's got nothing whatsoever to do with the school. And where the council do have a responsibility, where I believe they failed in the past, is when a school gets rebuilt or extended, parking issues should be looked at. And I believe in certain schools this hasn't been looked at, which causes a problem, which we go round and round and round. But probably will be going round and round for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I don't think there's any answer. That's the planning process, isn't it? Thank you. Right, there are no more members indicated to speak, so I'm going to move on, and I'm going to propose that our comments that be recorded and fed back to Steve's been here and listened to them, but we've recorded them and we'll feed those back to you, Steve. I mean, the drink and drugs stats to be included in future reports would be good, please. And I'll move that the committee endorse the report and that our satisfaction be recorded on actions taken to mitigate challenges described in the report to date, as well as future activity planned by the Lincolnshire Road Safety Partnership. Does anyone dissent? I have no one dissenting, so that is agreed, and we'll move on then. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for coming and presenting that. It's much appreciated. I'll move on to the committee work programme, and this item is on pages 213 to 220 of the agenda pack. This item enables the committee to comment on the content of its work programme, and the report will be presented by Chiara, Scrutiny Officer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to confirm that since the publication of this agenda pack, there have not been any further changes, amendments, additions or omissions to the published work programme for this committee. I'd like to just take a moment to reflect on our next meeting, which is scheduled for the 10th of June 2024. We are due 4 items for pre-decision scrutiny. That's going to be a bit of a meaty agenda. And we also have the item on the rail recovery and strategic role in providing connectivity supporting Lincolnshire communities and economy, presented by officers but also external partners. And I'm highlighting this item because this is something that members of the committee have asked previously on various occasions. I would also like to inform you that in line with requests raised at the previous meeting of this committee, we've got 2 items now added on our October agenda, one on the traffic regulation orders performance report and one on Fix My Street app. And with this, I would like to, sorry, the latter is on the 3rd December agenda rather than the October agenda. And with this, I would like to conclude my update to you, and I'm happy to take any questions or further suggestions for items to be included in your work programme. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiara. Are there any questions or comments on that? No? Well, I'm going to move then that we note the report and approve the existing work programme as detailed on pages 213 to 220 and the additional items highlighted in discussion today. Does anyone dissent? If so, please indicate. No, no one dissenting, so that is agreed. So that brings me to the end of the meeting. Just like to say that I've decided to stand down after today's meeting as chairman of the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee. I'm going to lighten my load over the next year because I won't be standing again in 2025. So I'd just like to thank everyone, all the members, officers and everyone for the support over that time. I mean, you get tremendous support from officers. Members are really good in the way that they ask questions and respect the chair. And so I'm really grateful for all of that over the time I've been chairman of the committee. So thank you very much. And I'll declare the meeting closed now, and safe journey home to everyone.